I'm Anna Zaros. I'm the Director of Advancement at Nonviolent Peace Force. I am joining from Minneapolis, Minnesota in the US. It's lovely to see you all. There's so many. One thing I love about the longer I'm here is the more all of you become familiar faces. And it's really, really lovely to have you all joining today because I know you care so much about what's happening in the world right now. And I appreciate that you're here to listen into what's going on with Nonviolent Peace Force and the work that we do in the communities that we work in. So we did want to start first by, we will have time to hear from Tiffany Easthom, our Executive Director, and Rosemary Kabaki, who is our Head of Mission from South Sudan. They're going to talk to us a little bit about how the changing dynamics in the world right now, how Trump administration policies and reactions to that around the world are impacting our organization, but most importantly, the communities where we work. So we are going to get into that. And there will be time for questions. And as you have questions, please feel free, or thoughts, please feel free to put that in the chat. We can make this as interactive as possible, but we do have a lot that we want to share with you. But before we get into all that, we did want to take a moment to remember one of NP's founders, David Hartsoe. David, as many of you know, dedicated his life to the unwavering belief that peace is possible and must be actively built. And we lost David last month. He passed away. And so we wanted to make some space because his vision and commitment to nonviolence, we know, shaped countless movements, from civil rights sit-ins of the 1960s to peace-building efforts in Kosovo and to the creation of so many peace organizations, including Nonviolent Peace Force. And when we thought about honoring David during this cafe and having a moment of silence, we thought David might have encouraged us to turn the focus on those who are still suffering in the world. So we're going to take a moment of silence to remember David and to honor his legacy, and in his spirit to hold in our hearts those impacted by violence in our world and those still working tirelessly to bring about peace. Thank you. Thank you for holding David in memory with us and holding those who are suffering around the world as he would want us to do. He would want us to keep going and fighting for peace. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. So I'm going to set the stage just a little bit as to why we're here. I know those of you who are on this call follow what's happening and know well. So I'm just going to share a little bit about, what brought us here today, why we're thinking about what we want to share with you, and then I'll turn it over to Tiffany and Rosemary. So as you all know, starting in January, the Trump administration began their work to dismantle USAID. And since that time, I've been privileged and honored to be in communication with colleagues who are in USAID and other programs like NP that are funded by USAID, and been able to share some of and hear about some of their firsthand experience of what that has looked like. So I bring their stories forward a little bit to frame our conversation because we often hear about the politics, but I feel like we hear less about the people impacted. So one colleague who was at USAID in the office in DC when DOJ officials came in said that they DOJ officials directly said to USAID staff, "We will traumatize you to the breaking point." They had their meetings and their internal communications tracked, and people even found that their personal phones and the communications on them were being tracked as well. Here in Minnesota, and in other parts of the country, I'm sure, there are lots of farmers who are worried about all the crops that are going to go to waste because they would sell those to USAID to feed people who were facing famine around the world. And one of one story stuck with me of someone who was still at USAID who used to administer a program that provided support to lactation consultants in conflict zones. So these were mamas, aunties, women who worked in their communities to help other women, help young moms still feed their babies when there was conflict. And they had to cut that program because it wasn't life-saving enough. And these are the kinds of choices the staff are having to make and what they're facing. So our advocacy team has been working diligently to try to influence the US government at the federal level. And we've been sounding loudly that the rash and abrupt nature of these cuts makes the US and our organizations an untrustworthy partner around the world, and that these actions threaten the rule of law. They represent a grave overstep in executive authority. World who are a part of this programming, who receive this support, are being directly harmed. They're the ones who are most hurt by these changes. They're community leaders, human rights defenders, medical professionals, families. These cuts to USAID make the world less safe. They make us all less safe. People are now dying because they are victims of the circumstance of the location of their home and the whims of the current administration. So a few months ago, we had an initial briefing on the impact of these USAID cuts from Tiffany and Felicity, our global head of advocacy and policy. But now we're going to take a little deeper dive and answer more of your questions about the impact on everyday people with whom we work. So I'm going to start with Rosemary again. Rosemary Kabaki is with us. She's the head of mission for our South Sudan program. And as many of you know here, our South Sudan program has been in existence since 2010. We have had 300 staff covering across the country. For a long time, South Sudan was our largest program. But recently, even before the Trump administration, due to priority shifts, the funding for South Sudan work has gotten smaller and smaller and smaller. So, Rosemary, could you tell us a story that helps us understand and illustrates what the work of South Sudan has typically looked like, and then share with us a little bit of what that downsizing has meant for the team?
Thank you, Anna. This is one of my favorite bits, talking about the work that our staff in NP South Sudan do. It brings to mind some of the work that the team did just a couple of months ago. So to give you a little bit of background, in Juba POC, which is actually an IDP camp, because it's no longer officially a POC, but Juba POC, we've been working with community protection teams, specifically youth protection teams. And one of the areas they identified was that the gangs which have grown up in the communities. So all these communities that have come in together, trying to escape to what they perceive to be a safe area, all have then conflict between themselves. And one of the conflicts is the emergence of gang groups that are basically criminal. And everybody, honestly, so many humanitarian and UN agencies are like, that's a no-go zone. But the team and the youth protection teams reached out to the gang leaders, which makes a lot of sense. They're all living in the same community, and reaching out to them to discuss with them how to keep all of them safe. How do we all stay safe in this dynamic situation? So in that space, the youth have been engaging, the youth protection teams have been engaging with the gang groups to really see how they can all protect each other. And one of the things, as an example, that shows the impact of some of this engagement is a couple of months ago, we had some violence coming up when some South Sudanese pictures were sent around that they'd been killed in Sudan in the conflict that is going there. And what basically happened here in Juba and across the country is that the South Sudanese, on feeling that no action was being done by their government, went off into the streets and, unfortunately, targeted the Sudanese refugees and IDPs that are here. What happened at the Juba POC? Our youth protection teams reached out to the gang members who at the time were reportedly about to attack the Sudanese that were also in the camp as revenge. And it's one of those moments that they reached out, they talked them down. Wouldn't you have liked to be a fly on the wall for that moment, talking down the gangs, that they actually did not attack the Sudanese that had gone into the POC camp for protection? What amazes me in that is that there were no reports of Sudanese being attacked at the Juba POC. What I can say, it is the direct protection work that was done by the youth protection teams working together with our teams. And that's just a small example of how our program does look like. It goes beyond direct protection into reaching out the no-go area. So this is how our program looks like, basically across the country. And then we reached a stage where we have been struggling with keeping this program going. And two factors played in. One of them is international. The whole funding landscape across the whole world really started downsizing in the last year or 2 years that we've been observing that. In South Sudan in particular, there also has been a belief that the areas to fund are development and humanitarian. And peacekeeping, peace building was put as the last intervention, always as maybe a department within a humanitarian organization. And in that context, NP South Sudan, where we rely on funding in that particular sector, found it even more challenging to be able to move them. So we moved from 11 field sites to right now to 2 field sites. And that is how it looks like at this particular stage, where we have 2 farm field sites and desperately trying to keep staff at minimum level, at least across the country, to support the the community protection teams that we have in place.
Thank you, Rosemary. Thanks for helping us have a window into that work and also understanding these shifts that have happened. I appreciate that. And all you're doing to keep it going in the midst of all this. So Tiffany, Rosemary shared with us how these shifts have been happening, the impact they've been having in South Sudan. Can you tell us briefly about the geopolitical context within which these changes are happening and kind of how NP is situated that in our work?
Yeah, thank you, Anna. Thanks for sharing that, Rosemary. Hello, friends. It's heartwarming to be in the NP friends and family community, especially right now. It's unusually bleak out there right now. I don't think that's news to anybody here on the call. Those of us who work day to day for NP, our job is to work in places that are impacted by violence and violent conflict. We are quite used to it, and this is definitely a moment of heightened intensity that I think we're all feeling. So for one, being together in this community in this moment is very heartwarming. And for two, it's something that really has to inform our way of thinking. And as we dig deep, what we're dealing with today and what we're preparing for and what's coming forward. As we shared before, NP was quite fortunate in as much as we had very minimal impact from direct USAID funding. At the time, the executive orders came out a little bit earlier this year. So that first wave of impact of direct overnight having to shut things down didn't impact us. We're very fortunate in that space. You have to be good to be lucky and lucky to be good. Some of that was quite intentional and some of that was a little bit of luck. That being said, that process of those executive orders that continue to come out that are so outside the norms, it's demonstrating a seismic shift in rules and norms in national level governance, in the multilateral system, in the UN world, and the knock-on impact is certainly, we're already feeling that. It's everything from noting that the rest of sort of the humanitarian system, so the UN agencies, other NGOs, most notably the very large sort of material aid focused NGOs, are still reorganizing themselves, dealing with the impact. of the funding changes and having to scale down and reorganize themselves. So their work has been interrupted, and anticipating that ongoing. The other groups of donors, so the traditional donors that sit together with the US, Canada mostly, and the Canadian and European donors are the primary sort of traditional funders to the humanitarian world. The majority of them have already announced intended cutbacks. So while they are doing it in a different way, they're not cutting contracts overnight. They're meeting their commitments that they have made so far. They're making it very clear that for everyone to expect cutbacks coming into effect as of the end of this year. So decision making for budgets 2026 and 2027, which will show an overall contraction in the space. That's happening because they're shifting their funding into hard security. So it's almost worse. To have funding contract is always problematic. NP, as many of you know, we are pretty scrappy. We've done a lot with a little for many, many years. We've been able to enjoy a little bit more robust financial health in the last couple of years. And we're always anticipating financial challenges. So it's difficult. We appreciate your support and help to be able to do it. The heartbreaking part of it is what's underpinning that. And that really is sort of what has become normalized, what examples are being shown, and this tacking away. So if we think about security that has moved increasingly in the last 10 plus years away from hard security, militarized security, slowly more embracing what is a more comprehensive human security, human-centered safety and security approach of governance, diplomatic relations, so on and so forth, has just retracted dramatically. We see great power competition happening, competition for hemispheric control, and in a scope of change that we've not seen. The sort of relative stability of the last 70, 80 years is behind us right now. And we think about it from an NP perspective, and we think we're very practiced at rapid analysis, rapid context analysis, rapid conflict analysis, looking at what's going to happen, what does it mean for our ability to operate, access, funding, all of that. But that has come from practiced use and practiced engagement with inputs that more or less are predictable. More or less paces of conflict are predictable. And because of the way the Trump administration has sort of unleashed sort of a new era of the ways of doing business and throwing out and setting on fire the rule book, those inputs now are not to be trusted. Our regular sort of quick analysis can't be trusted in the same way. What we're seeing, what that means for real people right now over this last 4 or 5 days, it's been brutal in the countries that we're working in. In Sudan, we've seen an absolute escalation of fighting in Darfur, most notably in North Darfur around Al Fashir and Zamzam camp, where we have teams, we have 4 women's protection teams that have been working tirelessly since the war started. They've been under siege for the better part of the last year, and that siege broke over the weekend. People were killed, humanitarian workers were targeted, their names, allegedly names out on lists, and they were specifically targeted for some of the work that they did. And people are running with no cover to anywhere that they can get. There is the Democratic Republic of Congo, where the M23 has taken over part of the operational area that we have just started up in. There is great political power struggle going on in the region between the authorities within DRC, Rwanda, Burundi, with a real strong likelihood that this will spill over into a regional conflict. And the scale of targeted direct violence to people who are just trying to get through the day is extraordinary and heavy, sits heavy on everybody who has to bear witness to it and who is trying to support. In Myanmar, just a few days ago, at the end of March there, we had a massive earthquake that normally would be something that would bring everybody together. There's a natural disaster, that's nobody's fault. But the power plays that are happening within that are restricting anybody from going to help people who are not in government controlled areas, who are not in areas that are deemed acceptable by the authorities. really is telling that the human part of human security is really playing a second chair. We have the pace of climate change to deal with. We have the deterioration of democracy, trust in institutions, the escalation of the role of technology. Normally, we really try and focus on the positive things in these conversations, but I think it's important that we're honest with ourselves. And we will talk as we go further down the line about opportunities and work that's happening. You're hearing examples from Rosemary, but we also need to be really honest with ourselves that this is a moment that we have to dig deeper than we've had to dig perhaps ever in our lifetimes. And a piece of this puzzle really makes me think and feel that what is really grounding is it's a reminder that anybody in any country could be affected by the stuff that's happening right now. So a climate incident, a technology breakdown, whatever those things, a breakout of war, or internal conflict could happen literally anywhere. And that really means we all need each other in a way that is very, very clear. There could be a natural disaster in Canada next week that only maybe Ugandans would be able to respond to, or in Norway, where only people from Kenya would be able to respond to. And this is a real opportunity for us to recognize that and come together. So let me leave it there for the moment, in this moment of gravity and grounding. Thanks, Anna.
Yeah, thank you, Tiffany. Thank you for that level setting. So I'm going to turn it back over to Rosemary. So we know where we are. It's April 2025. And in South Sudan, the risks of civil war are rising. We understand that the support has drastically decreased. But still, you've been sharing with us really powerful examples of the work the team has been doing. There's work going on the Juba Protection of Civilians site. There's a really powerful story from PBOR that you shared with us recently. So can you share that with this whole group and talk a little bit about the resilience of the communities and teams and how they're adapting in this moment?
Really tempted to start off with the word Tiffany used that kind of caught my attention, scrappy, right? and that feels that way. It's I will really, the Juba POC that I was just talking about, I'm watching the team being scrapping and digging in. What does that mean? In Juba POC, even without funding, because of the civil war, we have had that POC now surrounded by military actors in an attempt to contain the communities there. And the team have now created a list of who's going to go there and support what the work that has been done by the community protection team. What gives us power to do that, or the energy to do that, is when the camp manager called us and said, NP, are you still here? Because if you stop coming, they're going to shoot on us. They're going to kill us. But the fact that we go around and we patrol and that we are there creates the presence to stop as a deterrent to more violence against the civilians. On hearing that, we then had not only program staff, but operational staff, the finance manager, the logistics guy, all of them being put in a template of, let's just go and show our presence there. What can we do? That's what we can do in that stage. And scrappiness comes across not just in immediate reaction to violence that's been going on. I was privileged just in March. I landed in Juba, and I really didn't. I was just coming from a meeting with you, Anna and Tiffany, and then I was invited to go to PBOR, which is the one of our 2 field sites that we're able to keep going. And I was invited to go there with, the resident coordinator of the UN, the big guys, right? They wanted to see the work that we are all doing together and see the impact. And we were then accepted in this big meeting with a big, serious government officials. And there, everybody was sharing how wonderful that, the whole consortium is, because we have World Food Program, we have Save the Children, we have Nonviolent Peace Force, all of us working together to try and address the issue. In that meeting, as different ministers started talking about what has been done and what more is needed, the conversation, to my little bit of disheartening, was around what was needed was food. We need more food. We need more schools. We don't have teachers in the schools. And I was just kind of sitting there with my heart dropping because Pibor is one of our most conflict affected areas. But you know what? We talk about primacy of actors, those of us who work within NP, and they're putting in their needs together. And then we walked out of that meeting, and the Minister for Peace walks up to me. He came running, can just imagine, in hot people hit. And he tells me, Rosemary. And I'm like, yes. And he goes, no, Rosemary, I want to ask you that Nonviolent Peace Force should not leave, because it is your team that has helped me to keep peace in this community. And I was gobsmacked. And I asked him, Honorable, in that meeting where we were identifying what areas we need to support, you talked about food security. So did the Minister for Gender, and you telling me about gender-based violence is prevalent in your community, and you need Nonviolent Peace Force to support you. In order for us to get the support, we needed to bring that out. And he literally, I'm going to do what he did. He went, oh, and he says, but Rosemary, if we had peace in our communities, we wouldn't need food deliveries. And I asked him, Honorable, we need to say that. We need to say that in all the forums that we could. And he did. Last week, he sent me a letter asking me officially to keep that program open, not knowing that Tiffany and her team and various other PD teams are desperately trying to support me in keeping that field site open. And in that letter, he not only said that Nonviolent Peace Force should support him in keeping peace in the community, he mentioned them by name, the Tanzanian, the Colombian, and the 2 South Sudanese. In particular, he said, I need them. And can I tell you what he needed them for? For the last 1 year in the town of Pibor, there has not been acts of violence between the youth. For the last 1 year. That's incredible. I can't say that about my town in Nairobi. I can't say that. And that has happened. And he says he needs Nonviolent team to support him. So those are our little scrappy bits that we are doing. And maybe we think they're little, but the communities are saying otherwise. They're saying that we need to be there, we need to do this, and nothing is too small to help the communities feel safer so that they can move on to the next level. So thank you, Annie.
Thank you, Rosemary. I'm going to tuck that story away and keep it close for when there's an extra dark moment. Certainly no effort is too small for saving a life. And we know our community still continues to do that work. So Tiffany, I did want to shift for just a second to our Myanmar program. We shared in February that our Myanmar program lost all their funding because they were fully funded by USAID. Can you tell us now, the earthquake happened, and what's happening for the Myanmar team and how are they persisting?
Taking some inspiration from your comment there, Anna, that no effort is too small. Let me just paint a little picture about our team in Myanmar. I was there, I was lucky enough to be able to visit the team in December, so just before all of this kicked off. And if they're anything, they are the literal manifestation of small but mighty. So the team in Myanmar has been small for a long time. They've really shown us, all of us who practice unarmed civilian protection, how much of an impact can be done for using a very small group of people that work very strategically and intentionally on the most important things. We were there, we were visiting the team in the office. And if you can just imagine, some of the team members the budget had already shrunk at this point so much that they were sleeping on mattresses in the office. And, you know, myself and my colleague Lena, who's our head of finance and operation, we walked in and we were just horrified. We're like, what is happening here? They had told us a few months earlier that they were going to volunteer to cut their salaries in half. We had told them there was no way we would let them do that, but they had not let us know that they were doing this, that they had contracted, that they were sleeping on mattresses on the floor. They were using computers that were barely outdated. They were operating in situations, some days only 4 hours of electricity. And I paint this picture because the most important thing to know is at the same time, they had managed to evacuate more than 5,000 people from active conflict areas in various locations in Myanmar. So they had set up systems and working with on the ground teams, local volunteers who work through the existing long invested in early warning, early response, trained in the strategies and actions and tactics of unarmed civilian protection. And that as over the last year in 2024, in some of these locations, fighting really intensified, including airstrikes, which had been a new escalation, the use of drones in a way that has never existed there before. So people were really at risk. And so the number one life-saving thing they could work on was rapidly figuring out safe evacuation locations, safe shelter locations, how to verify or at least get as much information in advance that an attack was coming. So that's what they were doing while sleeping on the floor, while dealing with ancient and crackly computers, while having just a few hours of electricity a day. So they were already there. We fast forward into February when the executive order comes out, and that cuts out their funding altogether. And they continued, they in some ways, some of the work had to completely stop. Some of the work we were scrambling to find additional resources to put in to help keep them going. And people were volunteering, so on and so forth. And then here we are at the end of March, March 28th, there's a massive earthquake. So the team suddenly is dealing not only with wildly conflict affected locations, now of course we're dealing with the death and destruction that comes with an earthquake of 7.7 magnitude at its most intense location. So as always, the small but mighty team pivoted faster than you could possibly imagine. They immediately thought, what can we do with the minimal resources, the humans that we are, with the extensive network that we have? That's their number one is their community that they've built out across Myanmar to be useful in this moment. What is most needed? So they've been working with a series of local responders, mostly through church organizations, so networks of church organizations who have humanitarian programming, women and children programming, and that type of thing, who are quickly trying to respond. And they've helped them, and they're working very intensively with them, training them. They don't know how to respond in this kind of emergency, training on them on what that kind of emergency response looks like, how to organize themselves so they go in rotating groups of X number of people, how to protect themselves from burning out in the face of this kind of a crisis, so that the response can continue. It's been impressive, moving, and heartening, given the severity of the situation, both in Myanmar and more broadly, to see in action what such a small group of really dedicated, persistent people will do. We have very recently, believe it or not, had the stop work order lifted. So the US government did respond to the situation in Myanmar by lifting the stop work orders for a number of organizations there. Myanmar is strategically quite relevant to US government. And so we are tentatively, cautiously moving forward with those resources that we just are found out within the last couple of days would be coming back towards us. So we've been able to send in additional staff, surged up the team so that they're able to continue to do their work, both in the direct conflict affected areas and the earthquake area. So I say this and share this to you. Many of you on this call are from the US. I'm sure many, if not all of you, are advocating to your elected officials, you're protesting, you're raising your voices, and it might feel overwhelming, but this might be a little glimmer of information and hope to let you know that in some ways it's breaking through. So to not give up. There are some examples where the pushback is actually having a positive effect, and that's what we're seeing here in Myanmar.
Thank you, Tiffany. I appreciate these glimmers of hope. And to follow that transition, we wanted to end with one final question to Tiffany and Rosemary, and then take questions from you all. So if you have thought of a question, please feel free to put it in the chat, and we'll spend as much time as we can on those. But to wrap up for my official questions, Tiffany, so what opportunities are there here? As hard as this moment is, and as much as we need to stay grounded in that, are there opportunities, and what are those?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, going back to how we opened with a moment of silence and reflecting on David Hartso's role, I think about what he would tell us to do in this moment, what he would expect, and he would expect us to be bold, to be persistent, and to be courageous. And he would be correct. You know, there was nothing ever too challenging for David and those of his community that helped build NP right from the beginning, that was not worth taking on. And I really think this is a moment. The normalization of violence and deprivation is all about power relationships. It's all about asymmetrical power relationships where power is consolidated in the few, with the few, and kept away from the whole. This is an opportunity for us to really embrace and embolden and embody this conception that whatever the problem is, community is the answer. We're seeing, and this is not just since January, we've been seeing a decline in trust in institutions, a decline in services from those who have the duty and responsibility to care for civilians. And where we see the most impact is when we turn to each other. It's an opportunity to work together and to reorganize power, reorganize our expectations, and work together. Specifically for the work that NP does, and really drawing on the example that Rosemary used, is now more than ever, there will not be enough money for food aid. There will not be enough money for shelter aid. There will not be enough money for water aid. What we could do if we put our resources into violence prevention, violence reduction, physical protection of people, as we all know ourselves, if we're safe enough, we will take care of ourselves. And that's the real opportunity, is to really recognize the use of violence and the threat of violence, the threat of force, as the deterrent for safety, security, living a full and stable life. And this is what UCP does, is really work on interrupting those cycles of violence. So we feel this as a siren song, a calling for NP to step up, to support our community, the broader unarmed civilian protection community, to the best of our ability, because this is the moment of action, not to hide and not to be afraid. Thanks, Anna.
And Rosemary, how about you? What opportunities are you seeing, particularly from your place within South Sudan?
You are knocking on doors of humanitarian and development actors ceaselessly the whole of the last 18 months, right? Trying to say human security matters, human security matters. We knocked, and they were, of course, intuitively they said yes, but they wouldn't commit to doing anything about it. Can I say that from this year, they are now saying, where is nonviolent peace force? It's a bit overwhelming. We have Save the Children, IRC, UN bodies all coming and saying, where are you? Can you come in and partner with us? Yes, there isn't any funding, but the next proposal, we would like to include you. We really want to have civilian protections involved. And why is this important for them? Because of the emerging civil war that's coming up in South Sudan. They have had to close the hospitals that they had built in, because they, just for their own security, they've had to move. And then they found a nonviolent peace force. Staff are there, the community protection teams are there, the civilians, of course, are there, and they still need help, and they can do something. They're part of the solution. So for me, around opportunities, I echo what Tiffany is saying, working closer with communities for this solution. is the biggest thing. And for us in a Nonviolent Peace Force in South Sudan, we are trying everything we can to maintain presence. Is it at one national staff that can stay on, maybe in one of the field sites like Bentu? Maybe we can't fund a whole big program, but we are there. We are there. We need to stay there. All of us need to stay there and stand for this space and say human security matters, and we are here to support you and move forward. And people are listening. So that's what I would add. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rosemary. I appreciate from both of you those resounding calls, right? To maintain that presence. In some ways, it gets us back to the essence of our work, that presence in and of itself makes a difference. No matter how few we are, right? We still maintain that stand, literal and metaphorical, for human security and nonviolence. So as Tiffany mentioned, and Rosemary said, as hard as this moment is, it is also an opportunity. We can rebuild this system, not just renovate the old one. If one president can come in and dismantle it, it wasn't sustainable or just or egalitarian to begin with. So, and that rebuilding is going to take each of us. So we are launching an emergency campaign. This campaign aims to raise $4 million and will fund critical life-saving programs through this crisis. It gives us a footing in this time to make sure we don't have to shut down programs. We can remain present in some of these communities while we do this rebuilding, while all of us in this sector and in this world do this rebuilding. So 4 million may seem like a lot, but this is why we are a collective, right? We work together for peace, and lives depend on your gift, on your support, but you're not alone. We're in this whole community with other NP supporters in this space and from afar too, not even just, there's so many more faces besides just those of you who are here today. So together we can all fund protection and peace in the US and around the world. And so we're putting in the chat the link to learn more about this campaign. We invite you to give a gift today. You can make a pledge. That makes a huge difference for us too, because we can plan for years ahead. If you want to say you're going to make that gift for 3 years or 5 years, and just know that your gift today isn't just a donation. It's really a stand, keeping that presence, a stand for humanity, for dignity, for protection when it really is needed most. So that's in the chat. And Amy, many of you, if you don't know me, you know Amy or you know Gilda, and we're all here to chat with you if you have more questions about this campaign. So now we are going to open it up to questions to all of you. Feel free to put it in the chat. I'll just pause for a second and see if anyone has any questions. Okay, so Jennifer is asking to Rosemary more about the youth teams that prevented violence in your area. Wanting to know what the members of those youth teams said to you and others at Nonviolent Peace Force about their practice, their challenges, and their reactions to their success. What are the youth themselves thinking and saying? Good question.
Let me talk about the youth in people, because that's really amazing. That's a cultural conflict that's been going on since time immemorial. It is a culture that looks for protectors of communities. So as each group of youth or children grow up into youth, they are put together as an age set and designated as protectors of the community. But then, of course, life being life, 5 years or so later, another group of children have grown up and also become adults, and they're also designated as protectors of their communities. So some of this conflict that I was talking about in people is this youth trying to protect communities, unfortunately, by picking arms. But that's what they think they're doing. And what some of the work that when we talk to them as Nonviolent Peace Force is to discuss with them about different ways of protecting community without picking arms. This is why the youth protection teams are so amazing, because they're an indicator of youth paying attention that there are different ways of protecting communities other than picking up arms. And unfortunately, especially in South Sudan, it's moved from traditionally maybe fighting with sticks, has now become fighting with an AK-47 because the guns are out there. So that really has a greater impact in their community and brings forth displacement of their own community members who they're theoretically trying to protect. So when we have a conversation about having a weapons-free zone in Peebo Town, which is what I talked about earlier, for 1 year, they agreed not to take weapons into Peebo Town because bringing in weapons hurts them, hurts their communities, their children, their parents. Everybody gets hurt if they do that. That is why it's such a success. And this, when you have a conversation with them, do you know what one of them told me? He's now become one of the chiefs. Because for the very first time, the communities recognize that using unarmed methodologies protected them. No need to pick up an AK-47, bringing social cohesion, bringing in power to the communities and discussion is in itself an indicator of a protector. That is what I've been hearing from them.
Thank you. I love hearing those words from direct from the community. It really helps me get a sense of what's going on for the people who are most impacted. So Debbie's asking what more we can do to advocate for NP and to push back from what our administration is doing to so many vital programs the U.S. has supported worldwide. So perhaps, Tiffany, you can talk a little bit to what folks on this call can do, and perhaps you can share a little bit about what our advocacy team is working on too.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Debbie. So as Anna said, we have a very strong policy and advocacy team now, thanks to the support from a number of locations, and sort of at the core of that, the government of the Netherlands really invested and really wanted to invest in demonstrating that policy and advocacy is the next step, sort of linking all these great things that are happening in different communities around the world of people standing up, protecting themselves and protecting each other, and how to link that with people in decision-making spaces who are making decisions about funding, who are people who are in positions that have responsibilities to protect civilians and are choosing not to take those responsibilities up or actively aggressing on them. So we have a team that is much more globally distributed than we've ever had. They're negotiating directly with regional bodies, the United Nations, the African Union, the ASEAN, Southeast Asia network of countries, as well as in individual spaces, academics, and so on and so forth. So we will continue to keep that up. And what we can see from that is when in situations where it's either not possible or to augment situations where we're doing direct protection programming, is that kind of advocacy can actually have strong protection outcomes if we can get to the right people who can influence those who are aggressing on civilians. So there's that piece of it. Those of you who are US based and really looking at that, your own administration, again, your local political activism is welcome. I know it's a long game, but that pressure needs to stay up. Those of us who are not from the US doing that kind of thing from all the other governments as well. We can't, the US government is making its own choice, but our US friends are need help in this case. This is a good example of being in an accompaniment and solidarity with the country and civilians in a country that's having a hard time. And I would think that there's this other element that we should be thinking about very strategically, is following the money and thinking about how to influence the corporations and these very wealthy business holders, and looking at that through shareholders. So shareholders of different companies have a lot of impact and influence. And as we can see, some of the stuff, it's not perfect, but some decisions, some major corporations who've rolled back bad decisions or chosen to not make decisions that we as NP and this community would not be in support of, like the Disney World or the Disney Corporation, like Walmart. That has been as a result of economic pressure and shareholder pressure. So I think that's an avenue certainly that we need to be mapping out and looking about how we can contribute, and not just an unarmed civilian protection, but an unarmed civilian protection, the values that inspire that, and try to infuse that across sectors all over the place, everywhere that we're integrating.
Thank you. Thanks, Tiffany. We probably have time for just a couple more questions, if anyone has one. I'm going to use moderator privilege. I wonder, Tiffany, if you could share a little bit more about some of the new ways that we're doing our work these days. So you touched on that and some of the opportunities, but perhaps tell us a little bit more about the UCP Academy folks might not know about.
Yeah, I mean, we've been anticipating, and there are a number of things, we're in a strategic planning year, which is ever so challenging in the rumble that is 2025, but we have been anticipating a number of the changes, as I said in my opening comments, not the pace and intensity of these changes, but changes were coming. So we've been really thinking about how NP as an organization can really serve the cause of violence interruption without simply seeking to becoming a bigger and bigger and bigger organization. That's just in service of that mentality that you have to continue to grow, to dominate, to get your point across. And that is antithetical to our values process. So we've really thought, okay, the core of our work is our humanitarian protection, our direct implementation. That's where what works, what doesn't work, what works better. It's the way that we're able to demonstrate. It's our showpiece that everything else, policy, advocacy, research comes from. So we want to protect that as much as we can. It's also the right thing to do for people most at risk for violence. And then we look at the ring outside of that and how can we help build out the broader community of practitioners and activists, whether they call it UCP or not, doesn't matter, but who are working on doing this kind of work, civilian to civilian, unarmed approaches to reducing violence, protecting themselves and protecting each other. We get a lot of requests for training. And so we have not been organized in a way to be able to respond to those robustly outside of the existing countries that we're operating in. So over the last year, we have been building out something called the UCP Academy, an Armed Civilian Protection Academy. We have built it's an online platform that will go live later this year, which will allow a broadest range possible of people to participate in skills building, knowledge building about this type of work. And our goal is to have a whole gradient range of offerings from the very, very basics, a little taster, to courses that are more in depth, to courses that could lead to in-person support and coaching or connection. And through that, not only would that be contributing to broadening out skills, capacities, and actions, but also building out the community. So it becomes the connector for people across countries, even within their own countries who might not know each other. So that's a real specific piece of work that we're really looking to build up and to invest in. Excuse me. We're also looking at different ways to engage in the digital space with the rapid sort of ubiquity of tech in our lives, the role that it plays both to bring us together, but also the role that it plays in dividing us continues to be an area that we really struggle with and have a lot of concern for. So sort of thinking about what does a digital peace force look like and think about. We've done some projects in different countries that we work in, looking into the digital space, places like Iraq and Myanmar, for example, rumor control in South Sudan, in that digital environment. So we will continue to invest in that space. In the era that we are in now, it would be us acting with blinders on if we did not also realize the level of the threat levels that exist in the tech and digital space. So we continue to work in those spaces. I just had a meeting today with our head of programming in Iraq. We just wrapped up a pilot project about water scarcity in Iraq. So we work together in partnership with another organization that does water services. We of course do, as you know, violence interruption and helping people deal with these situations. And it has really been an interesting learning opportunity about how coming together around that very specific issue in a water scarce location between two communities, Sinjar and Ba'aj in Iraq, has been the breakthrough activity that has brought this group of people together in a way that we've been trying to do for the last couple of years, with hit and miss successes. In each community, no problem. Trying to get them to come together has been harder than you could possibly imagine. But they've just finished this water scarcity program, and that's what they have in common. So, and it's really built around a positive, collaborative, constructive solution towards a climate issue, rather than just looking at it as a problem and everybody having to relocate and move away. So all of this is the space that we are going to boldly continue to embody, to be creative, innovative, and to not work from a place of fear.
Thank you, Tiffany. I hope that today we have left you with both the reality of the situation, which we are all living together and know well, but also hope that we will still continue to do this work with all of your support, and that community is still working together to build peace and safety in their communities. So thank you for being here. I'm going to put in the chat again that link if you're interested in learning about the campaign, and just know we're here anytime you want to chat with us. We love to be in touch with you. So thank you again for being here, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Be well, everybody.